Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friendly Circle Berlin Monday Workshop. My name is Patrick, and I'll be your host. And today we have a wonderful panel discussion for you all. I've just been at the Internal Family Systems Annual Conference in Chicago, and they actually invited me as a representative of our community to talk about what we're all doing here with integrating IFS and our recovery work, whether it's 12-step or whether it's any form of recovery you're in. And with our book studies and with all these workshops that all these wonderful IFS trainers have been putting on for us. And with that, I'll introduce our panel and then we'll get started. So with us today is the wonderful Cece Sykes, who I think many of you know. She needs little or no introduction to this group. She's been coming here for, I first reached out to the Institute in 2021, and that's when I was introduced to Cece. And she's been with us many times, including twice at our live conferences. Well, she came in on Zoom at the live conference in London in 2024 for a day, and she was with us for a whole day. Actually, she was with us more than a day, but it was great to have her with us in Dublin this year at Trinity College, where she presented an entire day on IFS, and the founder of IFS Institute also came in and joined us via Zoom, Dick Schwartz. So we're really appreciative of all of the support that we get from the IFS Institute and from trainers and people like Cece and everybody else. So Cece is a senior trainer with the IFS Institute. She's been integrating internal family systems with addiction treatment for decades. And beginning her career as a family therapist in Chicago, she has worked extensively with trauma survivors, eating disorders, and addictions. Since the late 1990s, she has focused on IFS and is co-author of the 2023 best-selling manual, Internal Family Systems Therapy for Addictions, with Martha Sweezy and Dick Schwartz. Cece has been instrumental in bringing IFS to 12-step communities, including this one, Friendly Circle Berlin, and her recent work at High Watch Recovery Center, which we'll talk about today. The first 12-step based rehab ever on the planet, founded in 1939. Now all of the practitioners have been trained in the internal family systems model, and Cece was instrumental in that. And joining us now from High Watch Rehabs, from one of their facilities called Arlena House, is Jackie Rhee. Jackie is the vice president and therapist with the High Watch. And she specializes in addiction treatment to integrative approaches, bringing together IFS, EMDR, psychodrama, mindfulness, and the Enneagram, which many of you are involved with here, I know. And at High Watch, Jackie has helped lead the integration of IFS across all its facilities, combining it with the 12-step foundation to create psycho-spiritual and holistic path for healing. And it's my great honor to have Lou Bardach with us today also. And Lou is an IFS-trained reparenting coach, psychotherapist, and licensed clinical social worker. He brings decades of experience in personal growth, including Tibetan-style meditation and mindfulness practice, and working with the LGBTQ plus adolescent and adult community. Lou combines his therapeutic work with creativity, writing, and spiritual exploration. His perspective as an ACA member and IFS therapist brings a unique bridge between recovery community and the professional IFS world. Now, we were to have Marie Tierney with us today, the wonderful Marie, who's done, many of you know, she's a member of our community. She is the IFS trainer for the IFS therapists in Ireland, one of the trainers there, and a member of 12-Step, the ACA program, and familiar with AA and all of, and Al-Anon as well. So unfortunately, Marie had her flight canceled, and she got moved to another flight back from Chicago to Dublin. So she's on a flight right now, and we wish her safe travels, and she'll be with us in spirit. I got to present alongside Marie at the IFS conference on our workshop titled After Rehab, What's Next? And we talked about this integration that we're doing in community. So with that, we'll get started. So I think I'll start with Cece. See, how great to see you. So I'm going to start with a question. So you've been involved with IFS since the 80s. Can you give us a quick overview of the model and how it's developed over the years, particularly in your area of expertise in the world of addictions?
Well, in the early 1980s, IFS was just a twinkle in Dick's eye. It didn't even have a name. But he was beginning work, he did a lot of research with people with disordered eating. And he ultimately decided out of frustration, because he's in the middle of this research project and he wanted to look good with the other researchers. He's like, I'll try anything. And he began having people apply the same principles we apply in family therapy to the internal world. In family therapy, if you got two parents, parent number one wants to be tough and intense and on the child, and parent number two says we got to be understanding and give them some space, right? If they're in a battle, see, what does child do? Whatever they want. So he began to have people listen to the parts of themselves, then listening to their inner conflicts. I hate that I do this. I should be nicer to myself. I should be harder on myself. And began to listen, invite people to listen to these parts. And eventually a model developed from this, which is still the main thing, Patrick, and to all of you here, the core elements of IFS have not changed since Dick first had this idea. The idea also, internal family systems meanings that when you change one part, others change. When you stop drinking, other things happen. When you stop criticizing yourself, other things happen. So that in terms of where I come into IFS is my own Irish Catholic family was chock full of what IFS calls all the firefighters, you know, alcohol use, sexual abuse, incest, disordered eating, gambling, suicide, all the things that we become addicted to were all out there, not all in my immediate family and my extended family. They deeply affected my marriage to my first husband and to all of his family. So I was surrounded by all this. And when I first heard Dick say that firefighters or parts that become intensely compulsive are protective, and that they're trying to protect our system from the emotional overwhelm, from too much pain. When I first heard that, I just kind of started crying. A lot of people started to make sense. So it was this particular piece of the model because of my own personal journey. I don't have the journey of recovery. I think there's a particular wisdom that everybody in recovery from substance use and recovery practices, sex practices, etc. There's a particular wisdom that you have with that I don't have because that hasn't been my journey. But my journey has been to how do you be with, what is the best way to be with someone as a human, as a partner, um, and as a clinician to help people move forward. And so what IFS model gives us, and I'm just finishing right now, Patrick, I won't go on and on, but IFS gives us this idea of a non-judgmental appreciation of the person's system, of the parts that are using substances and practices. And let's face it, we all do more than one thing. Welcoming them with non-judgment and listening to their positive intention despite negative consequences, right? They're committed despite negative consequences. Why? There is always an answer to that question. And on the other side, we have all these managers that never get enough appreciation because they keep things going no matter how bad it is on the addiction side. But also they can be very critical. We can have enormous self-contempt. So we want to work with those managers. And when the C's part, those two parts, when their battle, use, don't use, eases, we have access to what's underneath because what the pain, attachment wounds, alienation, not fitting in, all of that is underneath those processes. So IFS has the wisdom to look at this whole system. So my obsession has been my mission. I'll say mission. Obsession sounds a little strong. Has been to have IFS be a bridge, be that psychotherapy bridge into welcoming a clinical view of addictive processes that is compassionate.
Wonderful, Cece. I love how succinctly you explain the model too. So thank you for that. And your analogy of building the bridge. So obviously you've now built a bridge to the 12-step community. So, and would you talk to that about bringing the your trainings to the High Watch Rehab? Now, High Watch, for those who don't know, was founded in 1939, the same year that the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous was published, and it was the first rehab in the world using the 12-step model. And now I think it's the first rehab. Is it the first use that have brought in IFS as well?
I believe it is, Patrick. It is absolutely the first one that invited an IFS training. Some may have had a workshop, I'm not sure, but it is absolutely the first and only rehab that invited in IFS training.
That's
Rather than
that's
flirting, they weren't just flirting, they committed.
Yes, and I invited some other rehab professionals with us here today. Please take note. So, and we'll introduce Jackie momentarily from High Watch. And you're also helping building a bridge directly into the community through our group. And now, we're just putting it out there to the world that this can be brought into peer support groups. It's been done before us by IFS peers and some other. If any of you are here with any groups that are doing this thing, please put the information in the chat. I'm going to open the chat up actually, because anybody's got ideas, put them in the chat. Hold on a second. And anybody, you can start sending me questions directly in the chat if you need to. I'll just open the chat to everybody and anybody directly. How's that? And we'll make it a little more interactive, because this is all about community, and that's what myself and Marie, of course, talked about at the conference. After rehab, what's next? Because obviously, if you go to rehab and you learn the model, and you learn about the 12 steps, and then what do you do afterwards? So we're trying to create peer support community around that. So with that, I think I'll bring Jackie in. Jackie, if you could raise your hand and I'll spotlight you, and then I'll bring you in the spotlight with Cease. Hold on, I'm on my phone here. A little hard to find you. If you could raise your virtual hand, Jackie, I'll find you. There you are, and wonderful. Put you in the spotlight. So add spotlight. How's that? So, Jackie, it's great to
Jackie.
see you, and it was great meeting you at the conference. And I really enjoyed your presentation. So, Jackie, High Watch, of course, is the oldest 12-step based rehab in the world, founded in 1939, as I mentioned. Now you're integrating IFS across all your facilities. And what has it been like for your clinical team and your clients to bring IFS into a setting that has always been grounded in 12-step model?
Yeah, so it was challenging in a lot of ways, as probably a lot of you know in the addiction world. We're trained, especially early on and years ago, to be very confrontative in a way with our clients, where like we need to hold the mirror up, we need to break through the denial, and that unfortunately doesn't really work. And to be honest, when I changed careers when I had actually gotten sober after 2 years, decided to kind of check this field out and see what happens, and went back to school, and it didn't sit right with me, to be honest, when I was being trained to do that, to keep challenging. And yet I did understand there's this whole denial piece, but something wasn't really working for me. And I have to say, IFS has been, the Enneagram was really helpful and set things up for us to do it a little differently, but IFS has been a total game changer. And something that Cece has taught us, we did all 3 levels of training. Like, we are in for the long haul. Like, we are totally 100% in, both at High Watch and Alina Lodge. And so we had the entire High Watch team trained in levels 1, 2, and 3 over the course of about a year and a half, I think it was, Cece, almost 2 years. And we're starting over again with level 1 and including the Alina Lodge family as well. And so what we're seeing is, and what Cece, one of the things she taught us that was worth its weight in gold was this idea of when we're looking at our guests, we call them guests at High Watch and Alina, and they are, let's say, wanting to leave treatment early, or really, like, it really wasn't that bad, like struggling with the disease, or their firefighters really kicking in, we tend to want to confront that. And so, like, our manager is basically confronting their firefighter. And what do we have? We have a polarization, and we don't get anywhere. And so Cece's technique is do the U-turn first to yourself as the therapist or the staff member to find out what's going on inside of you and get connected with self-energy. But more importantly, the U-turn to find the client or the guest's manager, right? If we can get their manager on board, then that will do the work, right? Rather than us trying to convince them. And so really validating the firefighters first, or what's showing up, like listening. We're not condoning or necessarily agreeing, but validating with what they're experiencing, and then really trying to see if there's even just a small part of them that sees it differently or feels differently. And once we get that little chink in the armor, so to speak, it just opens everything up. It has been a complete game changer. And I know we'll probably talk more about these things, but the one thing I want to say for me personally and professionally was this whole concept of self. How, I mean, I could cry, how profound that has been. And on the first day of the IFS workshop, one of the things Margaret Conley said that I wrote it down about 100 times. I keep writing it, but it was so profound. She said, the heart behind our hearts. She was doing a meditation to look for the heart behind our hearts, and that, like the heart, capital H, I would say, that's the heart that holds our parts. And I just, something about that rang so true to me, and this idea of it's inside of us, right? And our 12-step literature tells us that, like, that's only where it can be found at the end of the day. And so it's so compatible with 12-step, and without ever mentioning even the word God or the God of your own understanding. It's just this idea of something really big that's connected to everyone's self, whether it's even, for me, not just people, but trees and animals and the universe, and it can be God too. And it's like whatever works for the person. So that has given our staff and our guests permission, really for the God of their own understanding or whatever spirituality. And it's just been really beautiful to witness.
Thank you, Jackie. That's a beautiful description, this compassionate approach that IFS brings. I also found that compassionate approach, I must say, in my 12-step work over the years. And, the way the two models work together, I saw right away when I learned about IFS from a sponsee. He explained it to me. In about 10 minutes, I got it from his explanation because he was talking about his own lived experience of it. And how important do you think now you wrote the 12 steps for IFS at High Watch, kind of integrating the language of both the 12 steps and IFS. So I'm trying to think about how they integrate, because I've always said when we do meetings where we introduce any new modalities, I always say this is not a replacement for 12 steps. This is something, it's a pillar, you know, that you can use and build that arc. In the big book they talk about the arc, and Cece talks about the bridge. All these analogies. How do you see that? When people leave the rehab, how would they continue with a practice?
Yeah. So actually, it was a subgroup, a little cohort within High Watch that wrote it as part of, I think we were doing skits and things like that. But what I would speak to is, when I look at steps 1 through 3, I think of that, and I've been taught that in my own recovery, that's like getting right with God, right? Or the God of our understanding. And so for me, that's self-energy and unblending in IFS. Like Cece has a wonderful mini unblend technique. to pause, breathe, and notice, like just these ways that we build self to part relationships. So for me, steps 1 to 3 is really about unblending and starting to experience that self energy. And Patrick, as you know, we do that 8 C's group with the 9th C of choice, and really having our guests walk the flow of self energy, experience it in their body, because we're so, at least I was, and I see it in my guests, we're so sort of broken when we first come into recovery, and we don't necessarily even believe that we have access to self, or we think we maybe lost it or it's been destroyed. And so I think we have to start with that, just this experience of some self energy through unblending and self to part relationship. And then when I look at steps 4 through 7, I think that's like getting right with our inner system, so to speak, right? So it's parts mapping, it's how we target parts, our relationship with our protectors primarily, like we're really working on that. I think one of the things I've learned with IFS is the slow way is the fast way. And so because of that, I have these little miniature slots that I give to people, and they're all over my desk. So that when someone's struggling, I'm like, the slow way is the soft, the fast way. And so this idea of really being with these protectors, getting to understand them, and sort of this one-way technique with the exiles, like we're starting to touch in on them. But, for me, we're not getting rid of burdens just yet completely. We're just sort of starting from steps 4 through 7. And so some of my clinical staff had a little bit of issue with 6 and 7 and IFS, because they think, and we hear this like getting rid of character defects. And I was like, no, the caveat, the difference, the nuance is we're not getting rid of parts, we're getting rid of burdens. So to just make that clear, that the character defects are not the parts, right? They're the burdens. And so I think that's been really helpful. So for me, again, steps 4 through 7 is more about the inner system and starting to really have that relationship. And then steps 8 and 9 is getting right with others, right? So that's when we're coming from a more self-led position, and it's slow, as we know, and it's not about saying we're sorry. It's about the living amends and really having more access to the 8 C's. And I think clarity is super important for those steps, that we are clear on when and how, and working with our sponsor for that as well. And then steps 10 through 12, we hear them called as the maintenance steps. I kind of want to challenge that a little bit and say that they're really, and I've heard, Joe and Charlie talk about this with the big book, but it's really about ongoing growth, right? It's not maintaining, we're growing, right? That's sort of the hope. And so for me, that's when we're doing the real deeper work, and I would say the healing steps are starting before then, but that's when we're really going deeper and wider with this work.
Thanks, Jackie. And how would that work in practical terms when people would leave? You have an IOP, I suppose, after rehab, where people come together in groups and can talk about all this and their progress and questions.
Yeah, so at HighWatch, we have the whole spectrum of care through PhD and IOP and sober living. And so our guests get to continue to work with the same therapist that they started with in detox. So in theory, they could be with the same therapist and step coach. We have step coaches as well, for the entirety of their stay. So it could be up to a year or more for those that do the extended care pieces. And so they're continuing with the IFS journey, and they're continuing with groups that, we run. So that's all incorporated in, and we have a huge 12-step component to our programming. There's hours and hours of 12-step programming in addition to the clinical and therapeutic modalities. So it really works very nicely. At Alina Lodge, we're currently detox and residential, but we work with our continuing care team for the next steps. And most of the men and women that come through are interested in maintaining work with IFS. And so we help them find therapists in their area that are IFS-trained. Also, Dick Schwartz workbook has been invaluable for that, because it has the little QR codes where they can do the different meditations, and who better than to hear. I love hearing Dick's voice. Like, it helps me when I'm tired And I'm like, oh, I need to go inside with my parts, but I'm too tired. So sometimes I'll just play one from the workbook, and it's really helpful. And we've done a group with the workbook where we purchase it for the guests and have them take that home with them so they can continue on their journey.
That's great. That's great, because the key is, what people do afterwards, and how what's out there too, and that's what we try to provide here. And as you see popping in the chat, others are doing as well. So I think this is great that it's coming out into the general recovery community. And a friend has just started a little 4 people group that gets together every morning and does IFS together. And I know there's lots of others doing things like that in the recovery community now. And the new books coming out, we're using we used Cece's wonderful book. We went all the way through it, a group of us, and then now with Dick Schwartz's book, the IFS workbook the IFS workbook. It's easily accessible. So as I said, IFS is not rocket science, folks. It's pretty well. I got it kind of intuitively from a member of the recovery community explaining it to me. I was sponsoring him through the steps, and he taught me about it. It's what I learn everything from is others in the program. So, now I'd like to bring Lou, if there. Thank you, Duncan, for spotlighting Lou. Now, a big focus of our community is really emotional sobriety. So, or it has been called stage 2 recovery. So it's you put the fires out, but you still got your firefighters, but at least you got the through rehab, and now things happen as Cease pointed out, once you get to put the substance down. But then, of course, the 12-step community is made up of so much more than just substance use issues. There's a huge, broad and roomy 12-step. 12 steps have been so adaptable. The way that I see IFS being adaptable, also, that's another parallel to various communities. I learned a lot about that at the conference. But so Lou comes from, as you got from my introduction, Lou attended the conference and is both an IFS therapist and an ACA member. I believe also attended Alateen early on, and so he has a good long perspective on the 12-step communities. So Lou, in terms of this emotional sobriety component, the inner parenting work that you're so familiar with through ACA, I wonder if you could speak to, first of all, what you got out of the conference, and where you see this all going from your perspective. Thank
Sure.
you, Lou.
Happy to, Patrick. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, it was an amazing experience to go to the conference. So I'll talk a little bit about my background, ties to ACA. Been doing that for about 11 years. Through my own recovery process, my first degree back in the day, I'm 55 now, was in psychology, and I started in that field. Bumped into my own wounding, not knowing what happened at the time. Shifted course, built my own .com company and stuff. Life crashed. Came back to myself, did a lot of healing and recovery, and then discovered that I could probably be helpful to other people in healthy ways for me. So went back to school for social work for a master's about 5 years ago. For me, going to the conference was powerful. I found IFS. I don't remember exactly how I did, probably about 5 years ago. Was going to school. It took me about, I think, 10 applications to get into level 1. So I was doing the online circle. I was doing the continuity program. I did the IFIO program that came out. And then finally I did get into a level 1, and it was just one of the most profoundly beautiful experiences I ever had. Had amazing trainers. Just everything they do is so quality and so attentive and so connected to self-energy is what I would say. So, but most of how I experienced things were all remote. The level 1 training I did was remote too. So this was my first time to sort of be around an IFS tribe, and it was powerful. recognizing a lot of my own parts getting activated in a number of different ways throughout the whole experience. Dick Schwartz uses a metaphor of a tuning fork, though, when it comes to self-energy, that there's a resonance. And I felt that so powerfully and palpably when I was there. I could just feel people's connection to themselves and to their own something bigger than themselves. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get into Cece and Jackie's workshop. I missed that one. I did get into Patrick's and Marie's. But a lot of the workshops I went to were, I guess I would call them my second choice. They were my first choice workshops, but they all had a theme of spirituality. And I guess that's kind of what I needed. I'm involved with ACA on a spiritual inclusion working group for 3 years and stuff. So it's been a tough area for me. So I just, I guess, moved into that a bit and signed up for some workshops that were really focused on spirituality and spiritual component to IFS. So really powerful for me. And in one of the workshops, I had a lot of stuff coming up, actually. It was sort of, I was feeling maybe some spiritual bypass stuff going on. It was triggering me. And as this was happening, I felt someone come sort of just brush against me, sit next to me, and it was Dick Schwartz, sat right next to me. So I had a little bit of a guru sort of wow thing happen, right? I'd never met him before. But, you know, I was able to actually, in sharing portion, to speak my truth of what I was experiencing in the moment and to sort of feel really held and to feel that that was welcome. All parts were welcome in whatever was coming up. So it was really affirming for myself that I'm on the right path. I've signed up. I've applied to apply for level 2 and was accepted. So I should be doing a level 2 pretty soon, how that works out. And I'll be doing some PA work. I'll be doing that sort of track too. So I'm all in on IFS. And the roots of that for me were very much ACA. So not going to the whole detail of my history, but my life crashed about 12 years ago. And I did some AA work. But as Patrick said, I was raised in a 12-step family. So I think it was age 10, I was dragged to an Alateen meeting. I was probably too young for that, and I hated it. It felt scary to me. But my dad was in Al-Anon, my mom was in AA. My mom died of alcoholism when I was 26. So there's a lot of history with 12-step programs for me. A lot of my family dysfunction was brought into the language of 12-step programs. So a lot of the language was triggering for me. Having done that. So I did some AA. I did a Free Thinkers in AA. I found that group that worked pretty well for me. I found Al-Anon, and I think it was in Al-Anon that I found ACA and found my way there. And when I saw what they call the laundry list traits, the characteristics of adult children, people who grew up in alcoholic or otherwise dysfunctional homes, it was like a tuning fork just from that. It sort of resonated with me. I'm like, yep, I'm in the right spot. So I also knew that I was in a really tough place, and my history would be the person that sort of steps in, hero child, firstborn, you know, start leading meetings right away. And I just knew I needed to not do that, actually. And so I'm grateful that I was able to listen to myself around that and really just sort of child's mind sort of open up into, you know, learning things that I don't know, and just sitting back a bit. Eventually, I did find myself moving into service, local meetings, and then with the World Service Organization, and really gravitated towards the ACA component of recovery, the solution being becoming your own loving parent. And there's a reparenting modality as a part of that program, which is a parts modality. And so that was my first introduction into doing parts work, was through the ACA program, and it was profound. And so I did a lot of really deep healing. I ended up being involved in the development of the Loving Parent Guidebook. So for those of you who don't know, this is their parts modality workbook. So I was involved, and I can tell you, just because I was involved in firsthand discussions, that there is a lot of IFS drawn into that. There's also NVC, there's also CBT, there's a lot of current sort of trauma healing modalities. But there is IFS infused all throughout that book. I can speak to that firsthand. I was also involved in development. I was the lead writer on the Beginner's Handbook, which is an introduction to the program. Recognizing that the way ACA is a little different than most 12-step programs. Most 12-step programs are focused on a particular addiction or compulsion, something that is a focused area of something that you want to address that's problematic, a firefighter activity. ACA, we'll talk about itself as sort of second stage recovery, but the idea is sort of looking under the hood a bit and recognizing there's a whack-a-mole approach to a lot of the things. You know, if I'm not drinking, though, then my smoking goes up, or my eating goes up, or my gambling or codependency issues. So it's basically saying underneath all of that is a wounded part of us. And IFS would say parts of us that are carrying burdens and parts of us that are trying to protect that. Through the development of the Loving Parent Guidebook, the base model of reparenting was expanded a bit. If you look in the big red book, chapter 8, which is really the reparenting chapter, it's inner child, it's inner critic, and it's loving parent. The Loving Parent Guidebook also introduced this idea of an inner teenager. And so with that, there really is a close overlap in a lot of ways between the IFS framework of the two protector types, manager and firefighter, and the exile, and then this idea of inner loving parent or self-energy. So my draw, and I did a talk at the World Convention, ACA World Convention this year, about bringing IFS tools and techniques into the ACA reparenting process, and sort of mapping kind of how these two fit together. And I've sort of become bilingual, I think, having to go through my own translation process. Again, my early parts work was in ACA reparenting, and then sort of shifted to really sort of include a lot of techniques from ACA. So there's a lot of overlap. It can map, but it's not sort of necessarily one-on-one direct mapping. In exile in IFS is very similar to an inner child, wounded inner child in ACA. The inner critic is sort of managerial part. The inner teenager, although it has a lot of manifestations sort of related to a firefighter. And then this question too, is inner loving parent, is that really self-energy? And then I did part of my talk was really looking at that a bit more closely. And what I would say for me, because there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some profound nuanced differences. And I think ACA can sort of talk about the inner loving parent with a lot of managerial infused sort of qualities to it, that I can be very sort of proactive in my recovery work. Whereas if we really sort of look at IFS energy in ways, there's not often an agenda other than a deep healing sort of process to it. So this is something that I think a lot of people talk about. This is my perspective on it. I think there's a lot of perspectives on this. But what I would say is for myself that my ACA reparenting, especially early on, was sort of a managerial driven reparenting process. And it's a part of me that's like, and we talk about, and it's important to have as part of recovery. We talk about action coming from love. We talk about in the Serenity Prayer, changing the things that we can. There's an active part in recovery. And so I talk about that as the doing aspect of inner loving parent, but there's also a being with quality to inner loving parent. And it's a very nuanced difference. And what I realized was the parts of me that were leading my recovery process needed parenting too, or needed connection with self-energy also. And so I've learned that to be sort of an unblending of self-like parts for myself. And it's very layered, it's very nuanced. And it's also something that I could not have done alone. Right. So I can, pick up my book here and go through here and do all my homework and stuff like a good adult child would, go off in isolation and do my recovery. I can't see what I can't see. I can't see when I'm blended with parts of myself. Right. So what I love about ACA is that we can do parts work in collaboration with peers. And that's what I'm seeing and hearing more of. That's what I love about this Berlin group, the Friendly Circle Berlin group, is that it's stepping a bit outside of the 12-step programs to create a little bit more flexibility, I would guess, a little bit more wiggle room. When I did the presentation at WSO, there were some folks that had some concerns about me really bringing in IFS focus to ACA. And I really respect, the traditions and recognize that we need a container around 12-step programs to sort of keep the focus on 12-step recovery and to keep the focus on reparenting. So I'm loving that this group is here. I'm loving hearing about what you folks are doing in different venues and sort of seeing how split offs can happen. And I sort of hear these groups sort of just getting together to practice IFS together. But what I'd say is ACA can be a really great resource for peer connection to do parts work. It's a different language, but if you are already familiar with 12 steps, it's oftentimes a fairly smooth transition, which a lot of people do. Start with one 12-step program and then find their way over into ACA. So I still use both frameworks, and sometimes the reparenting framework can feel restrictive and sort of like I'm trying to kludge a part of me into, is this an inner teen or is this an inner critic, and it just doesn't fit. And then IFS feels a little bit more flexible. And so I can kind of move in that direction. That feels right to me. And then sometimes I sort of can get lost in sort of the expansiveness of what IFS can be, and to kind of reroute myself back. Okay, this is more like an inner child. I got that. So anyway, that's been my experience. I think that's what I have to share today. I don't want to talk too much and make sure that we have time for some questions too. So really appreciate, it was great meeting you in Chicago, Patrick. I'm glad we had a chance to do that. Meeting Marie, who I've had contact with too. Cece, I said hi to you really quickly. So it's great to make those connections, and again, appreciate being welcomed here today.
So I just want to thank you all. It was incredibly wonderful for me. I'm still in Chicago. I'm meeting a couple of our group members, and looking for another one who's we haven't heard from in a while. So I'll be here for a couple more days. And I really had a great time in Cece's hometown. Thank you. And it was great spending time with you as always. And Jackie, great to meet you. And Lou, it was phenomenal to meet you too. So with that, I put a little closing reflection in the chat. Would somebody like to? Let me see. I'll read it, and then you can all. It's Hold on. Let me find it. I was thinking of Jackie actually. Jackie, do you want to read the closing reflection? It's in the chat. It's from Rumi, the guest house, since you brought up this idea of being a guest at your house at Alina Lodge.
Or I'm
It's
just.
there. Hold on, I'll put it back in again. So it'll be it'll come up first when you read the chat there.
I see it. This being human is a guest house. I just lost it. Hold on. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Rumi, the guest house.